You'd think someone coming to work in New York would learn how to speak English properly. Rachel scoffed, tossing her wavy blonde hair over her shoulder as she scrolled on her phone. No kidding, laughed Marcus, twirling a pen between his fingers. I could barely understand a word he said. What was it? Thank you. This position is important to me. Come on, bro. This isn't some Parisian cafe. This is Sinclair Media, and he was wearing loafers with no socks. What is he? A Bond villain, added Rachel mockingly. The office roared with laughter, a wave of snark echoing through the glass and metal jungle of Sinclair's 24th floor marketing division. No one noticed the man standing quietly by the glass wall, observing. His name was Julien Moreau, and that funny accented guy they'd just spent the last 3 minutes mocking. He wasn't the new intern. He wasn't a lost visitor. He was their new chief marketing officer, handpicked from Europe's most competitive market for strategic brilliance. He blinked slowly, expression unreadable, then turned and walked silently back toward the elevator. Not because he was leaving, he just needed a moment to breathe, a moment to bury the sting of humiliation and pull the mask of professionalism back over his face. Julien, are you all right? Asked Claire Bennett, the only one in the office who hadn't laughed. She was mid-30s, observant, and perhaps the only person who recognized the man from the internal promotion memo sent out the week before. Julien smiled faintly. I am fine. Just acclimating. You overheard them, didn't you? He didn't answer. Claire stepped closer. You don't have to let them get away with that. They were out of line. I know, Julien said softly. But you see, they do not know who I am yet. That, Claire, is what will make the reveal. Interesting. It was 9 a.m. the next morning when the staff assembled in the main meeting room, a glossy glass cube suspended above the city skyline. Rachel walked in late, Starbucks in hand, and flopped into a chair. Marcus was busy chatting about fantasy football with the rest of the marketing team. Why is HR here? Someone whispered. Who's that guy again? Another murmured, nodding toward Julien, who now stood at the head of the table in a tailored charcoal suit. Expression serene but unreadable. A soft cough silenced the room. Ladies and gentlemen, said Linda from HR, her tone bright but laced with formality. I'd like you to welcome the new Chief Marketing Officer for Sinclair North America. Please meet Mr. Julien Moreau. You could have heard a pin drop. Julien stepped forward, hands clasped, and his French-accented English rolled smoothly across the stunned silence. Thank you, Linda, he began. Good morning. I am very pleased to be here. It is not every day one gets to work with such a dynamic team. Rachel's face turned the color of her lipstick. Marcus looked like someone had punched him in the gut. Claire just raised her eyebrows slightly and leaned back with a satisfied sip of her coffee. I look forward to knowing each of you, Julien continued calmly, his eyes moving deliberately across the room, and I am sure our time together will be, how do you say, enlightening. After the meeting, the office exploded in whispers. Slack messages flew. Gossip buzzed like static. Holy hell, that was him. Oh my God, we mocked the CMO. I am going to get fired, aren't I? Rachel tried to keep her composure. She approached Julien's office hesitantly and knocked. Entrees, came the reply. She peeked in. Mr. Moreau. I just wanted to say, welcome. Julien looked up from his desk, eyes calm. Ah, Rachel, yes. You have Z. Coffee from Starbucks. No, she flinched. Yes, I'm sorry about yesterday. I didn't know. You did not know who I was, he corrected gently. But you knew I was human. That should have been enough. She swallowed hard. You're right, he nodded once. Apology accepted. Please close the door on your way out. That day, Julien moved like a ghost through the office, never angry, never raising his voice, but changing everything. He called out sloppy campaign proposals with surgical precision. He rewrote timelines, restructured deliverables, and brought order to chaos, not with arrogance, but with unmistakable mastery. He mentored the interns With the same kindness he gave the executive team. He listened more than he spoke, but when he spoke, people listened. One afternoon, he passed Marcus's desk, who was hunched over, trying to rewrite a pitch deck. Julianne paused. Your transitions between slides, they are abrupt, jarring. Try to smooth Z message flow, like a story, not bullets. Marcus looked up, stunned. You're actually helping me. Julianne smiled faintly. Of course. We are teammates. No. Over the weeks, the office began to shift. The mockery faded. Respect replaced it. Julianne's accent never changed. He didn't soften it to please anyone. And slowly, people stopped noticing it at all. What they noticed was his vision, his leadership, his ability to take a demoralized, gossip-driven team and shape it into a creative powerhouse. Claire watched it all unfold with quiet satisfaction. Guess we all learned something, Marcus admitted one evening, leaning over the break room counter. Accent doesn't mean intelligence or power. Claire shrugged. It never did. Some of us just took longer to figure that out. Julianne entered the break room just then. I hear there is cake. Laughter broke out. Not mocking laughter this time, genuine, warm. Julianne never brought up that first day again. He didn't have to. His presence alone was a reminder that dignity is silent power, that true authority doesn't need to shout, and that sometimes the best way to prove someone wrong is to lead them right. The following Monday, the team gathered once more in the main conference room for the Q2 campaign review. Julian stood at the head of the table, a single tablet in his hand. No papers, no distractions. He tapped the screen, and a sleek presentation came to life on the wall-mounted display. This, he began, is what I see. A brand with enormous reach. But lately, we have been reactive, not proactive. Safe, not bold. He turned to Rachel. Rachel, you created the initial outline for the revived launch. Yes, she nodded, unsure whether it was pride or fear knotting her stomach. Julianne smiled gently. You took a risk. I respect that. But tell me, who is the audience? Millennials, mostly. Urban professionals, ages 27 to 35. Good. And what do Z feel when they see your draft ad? Rachel paused. I guess they see it and think, clean, elegant. No, they think, I've seen this before. The silence that followed was deafening. Julianne turned back to the screen. They feel nothing. No pull. No reason to click. No curiosity. Advertising is not decoration. It is seduction. The room stirred. A few heads nodded slowly. Julianne wasn't just pointing out flaws, he was teaching. Claire leaned over and whispered to Marcus, he's not trying to make her look bad. He's making all of us better. Julianne continued, drawing out ideas from other departments, connecting dots across social trends, product testing, and feedback data. His insight was dazzling. By the end of the meeting, no one wanted to leave. They were inspired and perhaps for the first time in a long time, united. Later that week, Rachel approached Julianne's office again, this time with a different expression. No fake smile, no damage control. Got a second? She asked. Julianne looked up and gestured for her to enter. I've been working on a new concept, she said, pulling out a tablet. I took what you said to heart, tried to build something that stirs. Julianne reviewed the mock-ups quietly, then finally nodded. You see, Z will remember. Even if Z hate it, Z will remember. Rachel smiled. Thank you, I mean it. Julianne tilted his head. You are talented, Rachel. But talent and ego, Z do not dance well together. Keep this balance. And you will be very dangerous in the good way. She laughed, a little red in the cheeks. I'll try. Over the next few months, Julianne's style rippled through the company. The gossip stopped. People came in earlier, stayed later, not out of fear, but because they wanted to contribute to something meaningful. Julianne's accent, no longer the punchline. Now, It was almost charming. He'd walk into a room, start a sentence with "Thank you all for coming," and people would smile not because they were mocking him, but because it meant something exciting was about to begin. The day the Revive campaign launched, the office gathered in the lounge to watch the first ad air live during a streaming premiere event. It was bold, abstract, visually hypnotic, and it ended with a haunting piano note and a tagline that gave everyone chills. Feel seen. Be vibe. When it faded to black, silence fell over the room. Then came the applause. Not polite, not forced. Real. Rachel turned to Julien, eyes wide. We did it. Julien smiled, arms crossed. You did it. I simply annoyed you into brilliance. That evening, the company's CEO, Nathan Sinclair himself, showed up unannounced, dressed in a tailored navy suit, silver-haired and sharp-eyed. He stepped out of the elevator and walked straight into the lounge. Julien stood to greet him. Nathan extended a hand. Julien. Exceptional work. Revive's numbers just doubled projections. You've done more in 6 months than some of your predecessors did in 3 years. Julien accepted the handshake. Mercy. I am grateful for Z Trust. Nathan turned to the team. And as for all of you, I hope you realize how lucky you are to be learning from one of the best in the industry. He could have gone anywhere in the world. He chose us. The team looked at Julien with a mix of pride and guilt. After the CEO left, Marcus approached quietly. Hey, Julien, can I talk to you? Julien nodded. Marcus cleared his throat. I was a jerk when you first got here, mocking you, your accent. I was insecure. You made me realize that had nothing to do with you. It was me being afraid of being average. Julien placed a hand on his shoulder. Marcus, growth often begins with guilt, but it cannot end there. You want to be better. Be better. Every day. Marcus nodded, eyes wet. I will. One night, long after the office had cleared out, Claire walked past Julien's office and found him still there, light glowing warmly as he scribbled ideas on his glass wall. You never stop, do you? She teased. He chuckled. Ah, but this does not feel like work. Claire stepped inside. I was wondering something. Why didn't you report what they said that first day? You had every right to. Julien turned slowly. Because if I had, they would have feared me. But now, they respect me. Maybe even believe in me. She tilted her head. You played the long game, he smiled. Always. Weeks passed. Promotions came. Marcus became team lead for digital innovation. Rachel began leading creative sessions for new hires. The culture shifted from ego to excellence. Julien had changed the heart of the company without ever once raising his voice. And the best part, his accent never changed because it didn't have to. 3 months later, Sinclair Media's New York branch looked nothing like it did before Julien's arrival. What used to be an office filled with whispers, sarcastic Slack messages, and passive-aggressive coffee breaks had transformed into a space of open collaboration. Confident voices and shockingly genuine laughter. New ideas bounced off the walls like light. Everyone felt it. A culture shift not just led, but embodied. And yet, not all were fully on board. In the shadows of the progress stood one man, Darren Colby, the senior vice president of sales. He had been with Sinclair for over a decade, knew the system inside and out, and he wasn't thrilled about a French philosopher with an accent outshining him in meetings. You're letting this guy run the show. Darren grumbled during a private lunch with Nathan Sinclair. He's making the creatives feel like royalty and sales look like clowns. Nathan wiped his mouth calmly. He's making the company money. Darren, maybe take notes instead of counting titles. But Darren didn't listen. He had a plan. 2 weeks later, the team was deep into launching Sinclair X, a new AI-powered analytics tool meant to rival the market leaders. It was Julien's brainchild, backed by months of consumer research and internal testing. Julien's vision was to shift Sinclair's reputation from loud media giant to tech-savvy innovator. On the morning of the internal pre-launch pitch, Julien walked into the conference room to find confusion. The slides were changed, charts were missing, key stats rewritten, and the branding horribly diluted. Generic corporate, safe. Julien turned to Marcus, who was pale. What happened? Marcus stammered. I don't know. Darren told the design team he had final say. Julien's eyes darkened. He tapped his tablet. This is not our work. This is sabotage. The door opened. Darren strolled in with his usual smirk. Morning, everyone. Hope you're all ready for a real pitch. Julien stepped forward slowly, calm, cold. I must speak to you, privately. Darren raised an eyebrow. What? Don't like a little input? Julien's voice was low, controlled. This is not input. This is interference. And you have not the authority to overrule approved assets. Darren shrugged. You've been here, 6 months? I've been here 12 years. Yet you have not learned that success is not built on sabotage. Darren laughed. That accent of yours might charm the interns, but you're in America now. Pal, we do things our way. The room fell completely still. Claire stood up. No, Darren, we do things Julien's way, because his way is working. Yours. Got us stuck for years. Darren's eyes narrowed. Watch it. Claire, Julien turned. You will not speak to her that way. Nathan Sinclair entered just in time to hear that sentence. What's going on here? He asked. Julien looked him straight in the eyes. I believe Mr. Colby has compromised our internal rollout. Deliberately. Nathan looked at Darren. Is that true? Darren sputtered. I thought I was helping. Nathan raised a hand. That's enough. I've seen the numbers. I've seen the work Julien's team has done. And I've seen what happens when people undermine instead of uplift. He turned to Julien. Launch it your way. Full support. Julien nodded once. Mercy. Nathan turned to Darren. Pack your things. A gasp rippled through the room. Darren looked stunned. You can't be serious, he choked. I'm very serious, Nathan said. Respect is not optional. You've had years to lead. Julien did it in months. As Darren exited, red-faced and silent, Julien took a long breath and turned back to the team. We continue, he said simply. The Sinclair X campaign became a legend in the industry. Major publications praised the clarity, the confidence, the emotional power of the messaging. The tagline, no more, risk less, became a buzzword in corporate boardrooms. Sinclair's stock climbed. Startups asked for Julien by name. Universities requested him to speak. And yet, Julien stayed the same. Each morning, he greeted the janitor with a handshake. He helped interns edit resumes. He brought pastries from a little French bakery every Friday, placing them in the lounge with a handwritten note. From my old home to our new one. One Friday afternoon, Claire sat across from Julien on the roof terrace as the sun dipped below the skyline. She watched him sip his espresso, staring at the glowing city below. You know, she said softly, I think we were afraid of you at first. Julien raised an eyebrow. Because of my power? No, she smiled. Because of your peace. He tilted his head. You never fight to be heard, Claire continued. You just speak when it matters, and somehow that's louder than shouting. Julien chuckled. Ah, I suppose. That is the accent that truly counts. They both laughed. That night, Rachel wrote a blog post on her private Medium page. It was titled, The Day I Laughed at a Man's Accent and Learned What Leadership Sounds Like, she wrote honestly, rawly, without filter. About the shame, the growth, the realization that her mockery had said nothing about Julien and everything about her own insecurity. The post went viral within days. Julien never mentioned it, never brought it up. But the next morning, a sticky note appeared on Rachel's desk. No name, just 2 words, thank you. As winter approached, Sinclair Media prepared for their global summit in Geneva. The keynote speaker was Julien. The once mocked, soft-spoken man with a funny accent was now the face of a global renaissance. As he stood on stage in front of thousands, lights beaming down, cameras capturing every second. Julien began with the same quiet authority he always had. "My name is Julien Moreau," he said, voice steady. "And when I first came to Sinclair, people laughed at how I spoke. They thought my words were strange, my tone amusing." He paused. "But what matters is not the accent of your voice. It is the clarity of your vision." Applause thundered across the auditorium. And somewhere backstage, Claire, Marcus, and Rachel stood together, tears in their eyes. He had not just won them over, he had changed them forever. The applause in Geneva still echoed in Julien's ears hours after the summit had ended. He stood alone on the hotel balcony overlooking Lake Geneva, the cold wind brushing his face gently. Lights sparkled on the water. He clutched a cup of mint tea, not champagne, not whiskey, just something warm, something steady. His phone buzzed. A message from Marcus. "Just watched your speech again." Cried again. "You're everything I want to become someday." Julien smiled. The same Marcus who once ridiculed him without hesitation now saw him as a role model. Life was ironic that way. He tapped a response. "You already are, Marcus. Just keep walking forward." Another message popped up, this time from an unknown number. It read, "I'm sorry for everything." Darren Julien didn't reply, not out of pettiness, but because he understood some apologies weren't meant to be accepted or rejected. They were confessions, whispered into the universe. Back in New York, Julien returned to the office to find balloons, streamers, and a massive hand-painted sign across the wall, "Welcome home, boss." "Boss?" he asked, amused. Rachel grinned. "Just for today. We're not used to global celebrity energy walking through the door." Marcus pointed at the sign. "We had to do something. You made us proud." Julien raised an eyebrow. "You mean I didn't embarrass you with my accent?" The entire room laughed. "No way," Claire said, stepping forward. "You made us realize that greatness sounds different from what we expected." Julien looked around the room, faces once cold, now filled with warmth. He blinked once, slowly. A rare moment of vulnerability. "Thank you," he said quietly. "Truly." Sinclair Media announced its expansion into Southeast Asia shortly after. And Julien, he was offered the role of Global Chief Strategy Officer, a seat just under the CEO himself. Nathan Sinclair called him into the office. "It's yours if you want it, Julien. You've earned it 10 times over." Julien was silent for a moment. Then, "I accept. But only if I can still work close to Z teams. I am not built for Z Glass Tower." Nathan smiled. "Exactly why I picked you." 6 months later, Julien was on a plane to Singapore, where the company's newest office was under construction. His mission, to replicate the culture he'd built in New York on an international scale. On the flight, a young woman sat beside him. She looked nervous, biting her nails. "First time flying?" Julien asked gently. She shook her head. "No. First time going to a new job. I'm terrified. My English isn't perfect." Julien smiled warmly. "Let me tell you a story," he told her softly, with his accent intact, about a man who walked into an office and was laughed at for how he spoke. "How did he get through it?" she asked. Julien took a sip of water. "By remembering that courage is not speaking perfectly. It is speaking anyway." In Singapore, Julien met with the new hires, many from different backgrounds, accents, and languages. He stood before them and gave the same speech he gave in Geneva. But this time he added, "When people mock your voice, they are trying to shrink your world. Do not let them. Your voice matters. Your words matter. And your difference is your power." The applause wasn't just loud, it was thunderous. Meanwhile, in New York, Marcus was leading meetings on his own. Claire had been promoted to Director of Strategy. Rachel had launched her own internal mentorship program. But they still called Julien, not for help but for advice, for stories, for reminders. "Julien," Marcus asked one day over video call, "how do you stay so calm, even when people doubt you?" Julien leaned back, thoughtful. "Because I do not need them to believe in me. I need me to believe in me." 2 years later, Sinclair was named one of the top 3 companies in the world for workplace culture and innovation. A documentary was made about their transformation. Julien didn't want to be in it, but they insisted. When the film premiered at a global HR summit, it opened with a single black screen and white text. They laughed at his accent. Then they followed his voice. Then came Julien's voice over, soft and unmistakable. You do not have to be loud to lead. You do not have to sound the same to be taken seriously. You just have to stay true to your voice, your values, and your vision. One evening, Julien walked through the old Sinclair office in New York while visiting. He paused in the break room. On the wall was a framed screenshot from Rachel's old blog post, printed and mounted. Beneath it, a quote in gold foil letters. Respect should not require a resume. Julien stared at it for a long time. Then he sat in the same chair where, once upon a time, they had laughed at him and smiled, because now they were laughing with him. And the only thing louder than his accent was the legacy he left behind.